It was the rifle that marked the end of an empire and the beginning of a new kind of soldier. Born in the cold, tested in the mud, and trusted on every battlefield the British flag ever touched. From the jungles of Malaya to the winds of the Falklands, it became more than a... When World War II ended, Britain's empire was fading, but its military tradition remained unbroken. The red banner still flew in far corners of the world, in jungles, deserts, and mountain zones, where young British soldiers carried the same bolt-action Lee Enfield their grandfathers had used in the trenches of the Somme. It was a fine rifle for its time, accurate, reliable, battle-proven, but the world was changing faster than the empire could follow. The year was 1945. The war was over, but a new conflict had already begun. Not one of armies and flags, but of ideologies and alliances. The Cold War. Across Europe, weapons engineers were racing to define the next generation of rifles. America pushed its powerful 30-06 Garand and then its 7.62 I-51 NATO successor. The Soviets countered with the AK-47, light, rugged, and simple enough for any conscript to master. And Britain, once the arsenal of empire, was left searching for a new identity and a new weapon to match it. In the dusty workshops of Enfield Lock, British designers began sketching the future. They wanted a rifle that could fire rapidly like a submachine gun, but still reach out accurately at distance. The answer, they believed, lay somewhere between in an intermediate cartridge, small enough to control, powerful enough to kill. The result was the 280 British, a sleek round that promised the perfect balance of speed and punch. It was the heart of a new concept, a light automatic rifle for a new era of mobile warfare. Their prototype, the EM-2, was decades ahead of its time. Compact, bullpup in design, and capable of both semi and inputs in full automatic fire, it represented everything the future could be. British test troops praised its handling and accuracy. It was the rifle that might have led the world. But politics, as always, had other plans. The newly formed NATO alliance demanded unity, one caliber for all. And that caliber would be American. Washington pushed for the 7.62 51mm round, heavier, harder recoiling, and completely at odds with Britain's vision of controllable automatic fire. The United States wanted standardization. Britain wanted innovation. And when the two collided, innovation lost. In 1951, Prime Minister Winston Churchill made the fateful decision. Britain would abandon the EM-2 and its revolutionary cartridge. It was a bitter compromise, one that silenced the engineers of Enfield and killed the dream of a uniquely British rifle. But necessity has always been the mother of adaptation. If Britain could not lead, it would perfect. So began the next chapter, the search for a rifle that could meet NATO standards yet still carry the precision, craftsmanship, and discipline that defined the British soldier. From this quiet determination, a partnership formed, with Belgium's Fabrique Nationale, whose new FN-FAL was already proving itself as the finest rifle of the West. Britain would not build the future it imagined. Instead, it would shape the one it inherited. And in doing so, it would forge a weapon that would serve its troops for decades. From the hills of Aden to the cold stones of the Falklands, a rifle that truly changed British warfare forever. When Britain surrendered the EM-2 and its revolutionary cartridge to the politics of alliance, it did not surrender its need for a modern soldier's rifle. Compromise became craftsmanship. Standardization became reinvention. Out of negotiation and necessity rose a new instrument, the L1A1 Self-Loading Rifle, Britain's disciples. In it answer to the chaotic battlefields of the post-imperial age. The FAL that arrived on British shoulders was recognizable, but it wore a different face. Where Belgian prototypes favored select-fire versatility, Britain insisted on control, discipline, and predictability. The result was a semi-automatic SLR, reliable, steady, and tailored to the doctrine of a force that prized controlled, aimed fire over volume. The L1A1 exchanged full auto fantasy for one brutal truth. A well-placed round from a trained soldier wins campaigns more often than a burst from an undisciplined arm. Workshops at Enfield and factories across the Commonwealth bent metal to that purpose. The rifle gained British furniture, sturdy walnut stocks, serviceable sling mounts, and a robust flash hider. Its gas system was tuned, its sights adjusted, and its ergonomics refined, so a conscript and a commando could both trust the same weapon in different ways. It was heavy enough to offer steadiness, light enough to be carried across miles of unforgiving ground. It was beautiful in a utilitarian way, nothing ornamental, everything purposeful. Adoption rippled deeper than manufacture. It remade training, drill, and doctrine. Platoon tactics emphasized aimed, rapid, semi-automatic shots at decisive ranges. Fire discipline replaced the spray of the past. The British soldier learned to shoot the SLR with the kind of economy that had once been drilled into him with bolt actions: sight, breathe, squeeze, observe. The L1A1 demanded patience and rewarded precision. It suited armies that still valued marksmanship as identity. The rifle's first real test was not a single battlefield, but thousands of small wars across the collapsing empire. In the jungles of Malaya, in the arid dunes of Aden, in the rivers and rubber plantations of Borneo, British units carried the L1A1 as a tool of counterinsurgency. It served police actions and statecraft alike, patrols, ambushes, checkpoint, and brief, violent clashes where discipline overcame surprise. Its semi-auto nature reduced accidental devastation in dense civilian environments. Its power retained the authority to stop an enemy at range. It also became a symbol of continuity. In an era when flags were lowering and new nations were rising, the SLR connected a soldier of 1955 to a soldier of 1915, both men trained to control recoil, to make every round count. The L1A1 bridged eras, a modern rifle built on an old army's values. For the British public and for colonial governments, it was reassurance. The government still supplied arms that worked. The soldier still held an instrument of precision. Yet the SLR also carried contradictions. Its weight and full-power cartridge made long patrols more exhausting. In close jungle contact, its length could be a hindrance. And as warfare continued to evolve, with lighter assaults and helicopter mobility, questions about the future of the battle rifle began to surface. Still, for a generation of British troops, the L1A1 defined their combat identity. By the time the Union flag flew over the South Atlantic in 1982, the SLR was battle-scarred and battle-tested. It would go on to mark some of the last pitched riflemen's fights in modern warfare. But before the Falklands, before final reckonings, the L1A1 had already done what Britain had hoped. It had taken a divided continent's compromise and turned it into a weapon worthy of the soldier who carried it, a rifle that changed how Britain fought and how Britain saw itself on the battlefield. The L1A1 did not earn its reputation in parades or factory floors. It earned it in the mud, in the sweat, and in the small, bloody engagements that marked the end of empire. From the humid paddy fields of Malaya to the tangled rivers of Borneo and the dusty settlements of Aden, Britain's new rifle was tested not by Massed formations, but by guerrillas, ambushes, and the endless grinding grind of counterinsurgency. In Malaya, the jungle was a schoolmaster with cruel lessons. The enemy melted into the trees and vanished like smoke. Patrols learned to move with a new caution, silent, methodical, aware that one mistake could be fatal. The L1A1, in the hands of jungle-wise soldiers, proved a weapon of measured force. Its semi-automatic precision allowed men to place single, decisive rounds. In close contact, that economy of fire saved lives and minimized collateral damage. Patrol commanders praised its weight, heavy enough to steady, heavy enough to tame recoil, and its long-range authority when the enemy revealed itself along a ridge or across a clearing. Borneo taught different lessons. Riverine operations demanded weapon readiness after hours in rain and sap. The SLR's robust construction stood firm against damp and dirt, its chrome and parkerized surfaces shrugging off grime. Yet the rifle was not without compromise. Long columns and sustained movement made every kilogram feel heavier. Men jury-rigged slings, adapted pouches, and learned to ration ammunition for the long days between resupply. The L1A1 became part of the soldier's kit, like a trusted map, essential, sometimes cumbersome, but always reliable. Aden, by contrast, was a study in heat and impatience. Urban checkpoints, sudden riots, and insurgent bombings demanded speed and control. Here, the SLR's semi-automatic discipline paid dividends. Fire discipline and aimed shots reduced the horror of crossfire in crowded streets. Its stopping power retained the authority the colonial state clung to. Yet urban warfare also exposed the rifle's limits. Narrow alleys and quick, violent room entries favored shorter, lighter weapons. Commanders adapted tactics. Teams paired the SLR with lighter submachine guns, combining precision with rapid suppression when rooms needed to be cleared. Across theaters, training changed around the rifle. British regiments emphasized marksmanship and controlled volley fire. NCOs drilled soldiers to make every shot count. The L1A1 reinforced a culture of restraint, aimed engagement rather than indiscriminate suppression. That doctrine suited operations where political hearts and minds were at stake. The rifle became a tool of legitimacy as much as lethality. But fields of battle teach equilibrium. The same traits that made the L1A1 disciplined and respectable also made it heavy and sometimes slow. As helicopter mobility and rapid reaction forces became modern necessities, questions emerged about the balance between reach and mobility. Soldiers improvised, tactics evolved, and doctrine bent to reality. The SLR adapted not by changing its metal, but by shaping the men who carried it. In these trials, the L1A1 did more than serve. It shaped how Britain fought its last colonial wars. It taught an army to value precision, to temper force with caution, and to see the rifle as an instrument of policy. The lessons learned in Malaya, Borneo, and Aden would echo decades later when British soldiers and their rifle faced the cold winds of the South Atlantic. If Empire taught the L1A1 how to fire, Northern Ireland taught it how to endure politics. The Troubles were not a conventional war. They were a conflict of neighborhoods, of checkpoints and curfews, where a rifle's every shot would be parsed by newspapers, courts, and parliaments. In that grim theater, the SLR stood at the crossroads of military necessity and democratic restraint. Garrison towns became classrooms. Soldiers learned that patrols required more than marksmanship. They required restraint, cultural awareness, and the discipline to de-escalate where possible. The L1A1's semi-automatic configuration dovetailed with rules of engagement that prioritized aimed fire and minimized explosive force in urban civilian spaces. The rifle's authority was psychological as much as physical. A disciplined soldier with a steady SLR projected order in a place teetering on the edge. Training regimens evolved to match the complexity. Range sessions emphasized controlled pairs, snap shooting under stress, and immediate action drills for small teams. Night shoots, low-light engagements, and rapid identification exercises became routine. The rifle was more than a tool. It was a platform for teaching judgment. NCOs became custodians of doctrine, ensuring that a soldier's first instinct was measured, his second decisive. Yet Northern Ireland also exposed the socio-political costs of arming an army for internal conflict. Each firefight risked political fallout. Weapons had to be maintained in public trust. Abuses were not just tactical failures but strategic catastrophes. The L1A1, robust and visible, forced the army to be constantly vigilant, not only about ammunition and barrels, but about the legitimacy of its presence. Beyond the home islands, the rifle's training culture exported itself to Commonwealth partners. Paratroopers, commandos, and regular infantry trained with the SLR as if it were part of their DNA. Drills and manuals passed down across exercises in Germany and camps in Kenya alike. The L1A1 standardized a way of war for Britain, precise, disciplined, and doctrinally rigorous. Technically, Northern Ireland drove incremental evolution. Optic mounts, improved sling systems, and adapted bayonets emerged from field feedback. The rifle's ergonomics were refined for urban use. Cheek welds improved. Sighting practices adjusted for close quarters. These changes were small, but they signaled an important truth. A rifle's life is not static. It responds to the hands and the contexts that use it. As the Cold War wound down and defense priorities shifted, Britain faced a question about procurement and identity. Would it cling to the battle rifle doctrine or pivot to lighter, high-capacity systems? For a time, doctrine held. The SLR remained central. But change was coming. Faster and lighter weapons, new calibers, and different logics of combat. Still, the years of Northern Ireland had done something priceless. They made a generation of soldiers for whom the rifle was not merely metal, but judgment had tempered by training. The South Atlantic is a place of sudden weather and slow miles, winds that cut like glass, and bogs that swallow boots. In 1982, Britain's soldiers sailed half the world to reclaim a distant piece of soil. They carried the L1A1 into a conflict at once brutal and oddly intimate. Small units, short supply lines, and fights decided by marksmanship and nerve. The Falklands would be the SLR's last great test. On cold cliffs and peat-filled gullies, the rifle performed in company with courage. The L1A1's weight steadied shots on exposed ridgelines. Its power curtailed charges across open ground. British troops, hardened by decades of counterinsurgency and urban operations, brought doctrine to bear. Aimed, disciplined fire, deliberate movement, and minimal waste. In engagements like Goose Green and Mount Longdon, the rifle's accuracy under stress proved decisive. Men used it as their instrument of choice, not for automatic suppression, but for killing the moment an enemy showed his head. Yet the conflict also revealed paradoxes. Argentine conscripts wielded the full auto FAL variants. In close quarters and sudden exchanges, the ability to pour out rapid fire could be terrifying. The SLR's semi-automatic nature demanded steadiness and control, virtues, but also constraints. In bitter, close assaults where seconds decided life and death, every round counted, and the SLR's doctrine of restraint was tested to its limits. Maintenance and logistics were brutal on ships and in the field. Salt spray corroded metal. cold fog condensed in barrels. But the L1A1's build quality and the soldiers' care kept it firing. It was a testament not only to engineering, but to the human rituals of soldiering. Cleaning rods scrubbed by headlamps, lubricants rationed, magazines inspected like talismans. In those small routines lay the secret of combat readiness. When the campaign ended, the SLR's role was both honored and questioned. It had served with distinction. Yet the future of infantry arms was shifting toward lighter, higher-capacity rifles. Global conflicts were becoming faster, more mobile, and often urban. The M16 family and newer designs promised different balances between weight, rate of fire, and logistics. But legacy is not measured only by adoption curves. The L1A1 stamped an ethic on British infantry, an ethic of marksmanship, of disciplined force, of a soldier taught to aim with conscience. It shaped training, tactics, and the image of the British rifleman in the late 20th century. In museums, in old footage, and in veterans' hands, it remains an emblem of a particular kind of warfare. Precise, professional, and deeply human. The rifle that changed British warfare forever did so not by being the lightest or the fastest, but by shaping how a nation's army thought about shooting, about restraint, and about the role of force in a democratic society. Its metal endures. Its lessons endure longer. And where soldiers still train on ridgelines and riverbanks, echoes of the L1A1's doctrine can still be heard, in the pause before a squeeze, in the discipline that steadies a nation's aim.